are going to die.
Well, friends, it seems that Hollywood is in a pretty bad place right now. Summer is supposed to be the biggest time of the year for movies, and Hollywood released so many blockbusters, one right after another this summer. But what happened to them this year? The Little Mermaid flopped. The Flash, one of the biggest box office failures of all time. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny flopped. Elemental, biggest Pixar bomb of all time. Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken, biggest DreamWorks bomb of all time. What makes these flops even worse is how inflated the budgets were. Indiana Jones cost almost $300 million to make, and that's before all the marketing and the theater intake. It needed almost $900 million just to become profitable. The Flash was a $200 million budget, not to mention all the overspending on marketing, and it's now officially the biggest money loss of any superhero film ever. What is the problem here? A lot of people in Hollywood seem to think that the problem is that people just don't want to go to the theaters anymore. And that must be true, right? In the age of YouTube and streaming, with all the convenience there is to find entertainment, people must just not want to go to theaters anymore. They must be just watching, I don't know, Disney Plus and Max. It's a whole lot cheaper anyway. But I have a question here, and maybe I'm just tripping, but if people aren't going to movie theaters because they're watching streaming services, then why are the streaming services also doing bad? Disney Plus lost many subscribers recently. Max, or HBO Max, as it used to be called, keeps changing itself constantly just to get new subscribers, which, by the way, they've been accused of lying to about with investors because Max actually doesn't have that much subscribers in the first place. Netflix is dying as well, and most certainly some of that has to do with the fact that all of streaming used to be consolidated to pretty much Netflix, and then they got divided to separate streaming services that there's no way people could afford. But you'd think that at least one of the streaming services would have pulled out ahead. Disney is by far the most recognizable brand where everybody knows what they own and what they make, and for a while there Disney was doing well, but then they started to dip down. So it seems that Hollywood in general is just doing bad. It's not just movie theaters, it's also streaming services. What is the disconnect? Well, it's not rocket science, actually. Hollywood is not making good mainstream shows and movies. I know that this is something that a lot of people reject. A lot of people think that this has to do with inflation. It has to do with more convenience in terms of getting content. I'm not disputing that those are things that make it a little bit more challenging in this day and age, and that there isn't more competition in selling movies and TV. However, for Disney Plus, it was going great, and they were going to offer a bunch of well-known IP shows from Star Wars and Marvel to get people to keep buying the streaming service. They used to make sure that they had a Marvel show going, and that when one would end, another one would just start up to keep people constantly paying for that subscription. What happened to the Marvel shows? They were all of them negatively received, and now Disney has had to pull back on the amount of shows because no one is watching. Secret Invasion couldn't even crack 1 million views on its premiere. The Mandalorian has dropped off in viewership. People aren't caring about the Star Wars shows anymore. There isn't one show on Disney Plus that I can think of that's really enticed people to stay and buy the service. It has to do with quality there. But we're going to talk about movies, and if people just don't want to go to the theater anymore, then why do they always show up when there's a really entertaining movie there? I'm serious, you guys. Why didn't people want to go see Indiana Jones? Bad word of mouth got out that they made Indiana Jones into a washed up old man, just like the big controversy over Star Wars and what they did with Luke and Han Solo. The Little Mermaid. People have been complaining for years about how bad the Disney remakes are, and it seems like with stuff like Mulan and Lady and the Tramp and The Lion King, people looking back at these and seeing that they're really not good at all, it's finally caught up to Disney. The Flash. Trash movie. DC is a damaged brand. No one wants to see their movies anymore. Elemental and Ruby Gillman had really bad marketing, let me tell you, that made it look like they weren't going to be good movies at all. However, Elemental, once it came out and once it started to get better word of mouth from audiences, actually has a pretty good hold in theaters right now. It is a quality thing. And the thing is, with people just constantly saying, oh, movie theaters are going to die in this day and age, what they don't realize is that people have been saying movie theaters are going to die for like a century now. When home TV was first invented, they said, this is it, theaters are going to die. When VHS was invented, they said, this is it, theaters are going to die. Streaming services invented, they said, these theaters are going to die. COVID, big one. They said, this is going to kill theaters for good. It didn't. Spider-Man No Way Home, $2 billion. Top Gun Maverick, $1 million. People do want to go to the theater, but You have to offer them something they actually want to watch. This shouldn't be rocket science. I gotta tell you guys, I go to movie theaters a whole lot. I watch so many movies, and I just see very, very few that are actually good these days. I think out of the movies I've seen this year, Across the Spider-Verse was a genuinely good one, though flawed. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, also a pretty good movie, but very flawed. And then Mario, a very entertaining movie, but also very flawed. These are the movies that are doing the best in the theater this year, and there definitely seems to be a correlation from having the most entertaining ones be the ones that people are actually seeing. And the ones that get bad word of mouth or really, really bad marketing, nobody sees. I mean when I say that most movies these days just are not good and that they used to be made a lot better. And this is not me talking from a place of nostalgia, like in my day, movies were made good. No. But did you know that as I've grown and as I became interested in film, I have actually gone back and watched a lot of old movies that were decades before my time, and I watch all of these old movies like from the 80s, 90s, 70s, and what I realize is, wow, they made movies a lot better than they do now. I watch a ton from these different eras, and I'm more likely to find a genuinely good film from decades past than I am now. I'm going to give you guys an example of a film, Titanic. I know you're rolling my eyes right now. This movie has come on a lot of criticism in retrospective for the sappy romance and the physics that don't work, but hear me out. They don't make movies like that anymore. They don't. I was just watching it recently and thinking that. On the one hand, you do have a fairy tale romance, the whole love at first sight thing. You have very human and relatable themes about feeling trapped and being able to be free and escape. You've got kind of heartfelt but universal messaging about not being so invested in the material and living every day to the fullest because you don't know what's going to happen, which is all told pretty well from a story like Titanic. And it's just like the directing and the music all just comes together to bring forth these emotions. And when I watch it, I see all the flaws, but it's like, I get it. I get it why people were going to see this movie over and over again for a year, making it the highest grossing movie of its time and still one of the highest grossing films ever. And that doesn't even get into the special effects with this movie. We're just so immersed in CGI now, and that just being a lazy way to bring things to life, that we just assume that anything amazing in films these days is a green screen and CGI. When I was watching Titanic again, I was going, oh, was that a real boat shot? Was that a miniature? Were they just on a stage here? I was watching one of the deleted scenes. This was a deleted scene of the film, and I was blown away by how much they put into the set. Where you had a set where the water was rising as the actors were doing their part, it was actually shutting off the lights because the water would like damp out the light. And I just was just amazed at how much they would put into a film like this. And the reason why I was so amazed is because they just never do that anymore. You can always sense that something is CGI, it didn't really happen, and there's nothing really impressive about that. Can you think of one movie that had the emotional resonance of Titanic and also these insanely impressive practical effects? I can think of one, Top Gun Maverick. No, it didn't have the kind of emotional, sappy component of Titanic, but it is a movie that had very simple, relatable characters, and it had this insane cinematography and so much practical special effects, it felt like you were there in the plane because the actors were actually in planes. I've seen Top Gun Maverick in theaters more than any other movie because it is a real experience, an experience you just can't get when you're watching it at home that makes you want to see it on a giant screen with everybody else, because it's one of the few movies that had the directing and the vision behind it that actually draws out those emotions in you. It also maybe unintentionally reads the room about what people actually wanted. After COVID, people wanted to feel uplifted. And so a movie about how a guy who's older, who maybe still has something to give, even though people doubt him, was really what people wanted. They just don't make movies like that anymore. And let me tell you, there were a lot of movies that I was never exposed to when I was younger, that I watched when I was older and getting into actual movie making, that I was just blown away by. Back to the Future, Alien, Terminator, Braveheart. Some of these movies weren't even necessarily for me, but I watched something like Forrest Gump and I'm looking back at it thinking about all the flaws in the movie, but when I watched it, I'm like, I get it. I get why people were so emotionally moved by this film in spite of its flaws. They don't make movies like that anymore. Let's go to Marvel. Marvel, which has gotten so much criticism by people like Martin Scorsese, and pretty much every director has criticized Marvel as the killing of cinema because they were angry that those were the only movies getting made. But here's just something I want to throw out there. I know it's crazy, I know it's insane for me to say this, but did you ever consider that people were going to Marvel movies because they were actually good? I know that's crazy to say that Marvel movies were actually good, and I'm not saying that all of them quality-wise were great, but Marvel for 10 years managed to go on without making a Batman and Robin or Green Lantern or Batman vs. Superman level flop. Marvel at its worst would make something like Thor: The Dark World, where you watch it and you're like, and then you move on from it. Something that's entertaining on a first watch, but you might not return to, and it doesn't mess anything up. Marvel movies, at their very least, were very, very entertaining. That's why they had a brand that everyone would go to. Hollywood has become so invested in the IPs because they're the most easy things to sell, but they've forgotten that you need to have quality for those IPs as well. Star Wars was, like Marvel, a big front runner and bring people to theaters until they came out with The Last Jedi, Solo, and The Rise of Skywalker, and those three films divided the fan base and pretty much crushed Star Wars into what it is now. DC is another example of a well-known iconic brand that was destroyed, and now that Marvel has come out with so many bad films, from Quantumania to Thor: Love and Thunder to Doctor Strange 2, now Marvel has lost its consumer confidence, and you can see the bar going low for their box office. Guardians of the Galaxy 3 was a little bit of a gasp of air for it before we know that the Marvels is gonna bomb. It is a quality thing. But basically what you might be arguing with me right now is that I'm just saying that we need to have more quality IP films and that nobody sees original films. They have to keep going back to these IPs to make anything. That's not true either. And I've been hearing some film snobs come up to me and be like, well, people don't want to see original films because, and this guy used this example, they didn't want to see something like Bones and All. Yeah, an obscure art movie about a romance between two cannibals with graphic scenes of cannibalism. Wow, I'm really shocked that the mainstream audience didn't go see that. Guys, there has always been a disconnect from the artsy films and the Oscar bait films and mainstream films. They are both offering different experiences. Martin Scorsese doesn't have a film that sold over 300 million in the box office because he makes different films than the mainstream wants. That's a good differentiation. You're gonna find a lot of good films these days that are indie films and artsy films and that aren't so studio controlled, but those are always going to be side things. The mainstream really isn't getting much. They have their IP films, which haven't been doing well. But if you think that it's impossible to get an original film off the ground to try to entice people back after Hollywood has pretty much downed all the franchises, well, then you're wrong. Because actually, Hollywood doesn't give many original films a chance. Stellan Skarsgård did a very interesting interview a few years ago where they asked him about superhero films with all the criticism they've been getting since he'd been in a few of them, and he did not blame superhero films for what's happened in Hollywood. He instead talked about the way Hollywood markets films and the way that the film industry lets films get marketed. He said that these days, there's really no distribution avenues for smaller films to get out and get a chance in the world. He used The Godfather as an example, where it was this much smaller scale film, released initially in almost 100 theaters, but word of mouth carried it so it became a big classic. But that these days, films are expected to at least have, I don't know, over 300 million or more to put up for a marketing campaign. They're expected to open in like 4,000 theaters to get noticed. And if they don't initially, after the first weekend, well, they're gone. If I'm interpreting what he's saying correctly, it makes it sound like studio investors are more interested in getting the quick bucks as fast as they can, which is part of the reason why they are so invested in franchise films. It is no doubt a lot harder to get an original film successful than it is with something with a built-in fan base. So those are the problems with Hollywood right now. They're making bad movies that no one wants to see. They're making bad shows that no one wants to see. They have cannibalized all of the franchises at this point, and they're not marketing movies in a way where new original films really have a chance. They're also overspending. They're also treating people behind the scenes really bad. That's what we got the WGA and the SAG strike looming up in the future, where Hollywood will completely shut down if this happens, which I think that it's good that this is happening, because Hollywood's been in such a bad place with the movie industry for so long. They seem only concerned with working people too hard and cutting corners so they can make the most maximum profit, but their strategy is failing. Stellan Skarsgård said in that interview I mentioned that Hollywood executives these days don't seem to see films as anything more than they were selling toothpaste. They don't understand the creative process of a film or what makes it sell. And that's what we're really seeing on display. There's no balance between the creativity of how you get people enticed to see a film, or studios that just see an IP name and think that that's going to sell it. Where are the young Steven Spielbergs and James Camerons and Christopher Nolans of the day? I don't even hear from younger directors anymore. We're not getting any new creatives that really know how to pull people in, and unfortunately these directors that I mentioned are past their prime in large part. Which brings me back to my initial title. Is Hollywood going to die? Well, No. Hollywood is suffering more than it has in a very long time. There still is a lot of money to go around though, and I want to say that Universal is actually doing the best this year with their hit with Mario, and they've got the best streaming strategy right now, which I want to say, I just want to throw out there with a movie like Mario, not saying it is the perfect film ever made, but it is a movie that managed to entertain its audience for a few hours, and that most movies don't even have that going for it these days. If you want people to come to theaters, you need to make them think that it is worthwhile to spend their money or get a Regal Unlimited or AMC Plus subscription to save some money, and that it is worth it for the experience, but they just don't know how to give people that experience anymore. And while I don't think that Hollywood is going to die right now because they've said that for so many years and it's never happened, it is a bit concerning where you see these executives who just seem clueless, like the CEO of Pixar saying that people simply didn't go see Elemental because it was original. Can you imagine if The Room came out in this day and age and people were like, oh, people don't want to see original films anymore. If they won't see this film, then what will they see? People do want original content, but they are not owed to support original content just because it's original. You have to give them something good. If he just took a little time to go on YouTube and see what people were complaining about in terms of the marketing, saying that it was not original, maybe he would understand, but these people seem very out of touch and that they don't actually have a clue what's going on. It's so frustrating. It's like we're the scene in Titanic where Rose is about to jump. We're telling Hollywood not to jump, but they just don't understand. Anyway, I would encourage in the meantime, if you're someone who's an aspiring filmmaker or a filmmaker or who's still learning like I am, to put your own stuff out there in hopes that it gets found, in hopes that people watch it and like it, so that we do have good movies out there. Because I honestly don't want the theaters and movie industry to die, and it won't, but you need to have smarter people in charge. But Hollywood is about to get punished really bad with the strikes going out. What do you guys think is going to happen with Hollywood? Let me know in the comments below. As always, you can watch my own short films in the playlist below, and you can support me on Patreon. Costs only $5 to sign up. Thank you, Patron J. That's all I got for you today, and I'll see you guys next time.